Greetings all, F-Man here. Welcome back to Assetto Corsa, and welcome to Formula RSS 4 2024. Yeah, this is a little bit of a blast from the past. We took a look at a very similar car, also by Race Sim Studio, a very, very long time ago. I'm not entirely sure how long ago we took a look at Formula RSS 4 on the channel, but this is its, can we say much awaited? Certainly awaited, and certainly very well received thus far, successor, Formula RSS 4 2024. It is a new chassis and a slightly different spec for a Formula 4 type car in Assetto Corsa. Race Sim Studio, they brought us Formula RSS 4 many years ago. I want to say they brought that to us in 2017 or 2018. I remember that coming on the scene not too long after Formula Hybrid really started to establish itself in terms of Assetto Corsa's open wheel mod hierarchy. However, this is its successor. It's a 2024 variant of a Formula 4 type car. In particular, it appears to be based rather strongly upon the Miguel M21 F4, which is the real-world Formula 4 car. Formula 4, unlike some other FIA-sanctioned championships, Formula 4 is a bit decentralized. For many drivers, it is the first time that they are competing in cars. Formula 4, for many drivers, particularly those on the open-wheel career trajectory, is the first time that they're actually competing in cars rather than karts. So Formula 4, very much, it is a developmental series. It draws amateurs, it draws hopefuls for progressing up the European ladder, in particular in terms of Formula 3, Formula 2, and maybe into either Formula 1 or into top-level WEC competition, or perhaps they cross the Atlantic into series like Indy Lights and IndyCar and perhaps IMSA. However, Formula 4, it is a developmental type series, and therefore it's a developmental type car. The object of this series and of this race car is to educate up-and-coming young talent into the ins and outs of what it's going to be like to interface with the very latest technically sophisticated race cars that they're going to encounter if they continue their career paths all the way up the ladder into a series like Formula 1 or WEC. Therefore, this car, it's not designed to be the fastest thing that you've ever driven. It's not designed to be the grippiest in terms of the most downforce. It's not designed to be the best in terms of overall cornering force, in terms of the slip angles of the tires that you can see fitted here. It's designed to be a car that teaches you the fundamentals of driving an open-wheeled race car competitively. How do you work with it mentally and physically? How do you set it up? How do you drive it on the limit? How do you drive it more conservatively when the track and weather conditions don't necessarily support the absolute limit of performance theoretically? How do you deal with your engineers? All of these things are sort of distilled and condensed into the design of a car like this, with the objective of trying to teach up-and-coming talent of how to get on in this brave new world of techie motorsport in the 2020s. The car in the real world gives us the following specifications. Just as you might expect from an upper-level tier open-wheeled car, we've got ourselves a carbon fiber monocoque on this thing. So just like you would see on a Formula 2 or a Formula 1 car, or even an endurance car, a GTP spec in IMSA or an LMP1 spec in WEC, or whatever they're calling the hypercar categories today, carbon fiber monocoque on this car as well, which means it's almost infinitely rigid for all intents and purposes, which also means that it is very safe in terms of crash resiliency and of course protecting the driver with that survival cell. This car has got all of that as well. We've got pushrod suspension on the car as well. We don't quite have carbon fiber suspension elements as you would see on higher level open wheelers, but you do have pushrod suspension, which means that it's going to be very responsive and very sensitive in all sorts of different axes of rotation, which means that the drivers need to learn how to deal in the very fine adjustment range of a suspension setup like this, because it only gets worse from here. But we have double wishbone pushrod suspension front and rear on this car. It's got shock absorbers, of course, and it also has third springs or heave springs, which means that particularly as you progress up in the open wheel categories, Formula 2 and Formula 1, particularly nowadays in the ground effect era, that third spring adjustment is very important because we've had porpoising problems that have plagued some Formula 1 teams since 2022. The drivers, for the first time in many cases, are going to start to deal with aerodynamic balance interfacing with mechanical grip balance for the first time in their career. So again, a car like this is facilitating things like that. And of course, it's got a grippy, aerodynamically sculpted under tray as well. So there is some underbody aerodynamic downforce going on with this car as well. Overall specifications, though, in terms of the dimensions, the length on this car, it's going to vary a little bit depending on which regional Formula 4 championship we're in terms of the crash structure and aerodynamic treatments that they are going to mandate in their rulebook. But the length can vary anywhere between 4,341 millimeters and 4,879 millimeters. That's 171 inches to 192 inches in old money. The width is going to vary depending on the series that we're in as well, anywhere between 1,733 and 1,738 millimeters. So that's somewhere within the ballpark of 68, 69 inches in old money as well. That's including the tire width as well. The axle track, though, that's pretty much par for the course on this car. 1,493.5 millimeters in the front, that's 69 inches, or 1,430.4 millimeters, 56 inches in the rear. Slightly narrower in the rear, which is always interesting. Wheelbase, though, doesn't vary no matter where we are. 2,742 millimeters, or 108 inches. So we've got this car. It can be varied a little bit depending on the regional Formula 4 organization that it's running with, but it is more or less the same package no matter where you go. And of course, that's for all sorts of reasons. Homologation for cost saving, number one, because we don't have individual teams entering cars of their own design, for instance, which means that they're not developing these cars at all, which means they're not spending crazy amounts of money trying to find hundredths of a second in lap time. So you control costs that way, but also you control the competition because everybody is running the same car with the same aero spec and everything else. And you also control safety because one car needs to be crash tested one time to be homologated to meet or exceed whatever requirements there are in terms of driver and marshal and spectator safety. So all of that for cost control and for just overall ease of officiation for these more regional level championships, as you would see in the Formula 4 world. So that makes sense. Powering this car, this is very pedestrian. It's a 4-cylinder engine, an inline 4-cylinder from Renault. It is a 1.3-liter engine. 1.3-liter 4-pod engine in an open-wheeled car. That's kind of silly, actually, when you think of it that way, but it is turbocharged, and it is producing anywhere between 160 and 180 horsepower, depending on exactly how you've got the wastegate of that turbo set up. So it's going to be a little bit sprightly. It's a car that only weighs 570 kilograms, so yeah, 160 to 180 horsepower is really enough to really start to get the thing to feel alive. So yeah, that's what you've got. It's not a crazy amount of power, though, so let's say a driver who's graduating from a kart, which maybe has 20 horsepower, all the way up now into a 4-wheeled car, which is going to have 160 horsepower. Yeah, that's a power jump, but the car also weighs several orders of magnitude more than the kart does, so it makes sense. But it's not going to be something that's going to be overwhelming for a new driver, nor is it going to be something that's a little bit underpowered. This car can still get up and go, just as you would expect a Formula car to do, and it does get fast enough through the high-speed corners for the aerodynamics to start to have a great deal of influence on the car's overall performance. So 160 to 180 horsepower, many road cars are making that much power, if not more, but it is appropriate for this particular car in this particular application, and it works very well. That engine, of course, it is longitudinally mounted just behind the cockpit and the fuel tank, and it's driving the rear axle as you would expect. That engine is delivering its power to the rear axle via a SADEV 6-speed sequential semi-automatic gearbox. Just like in the higher formulas nowadays, Formula 3 through Formula 2 and Formula 1, IndyCar as well, and LMP1, Hypercar, GTP, everybody is running the paddle shift sequential gearbox. This car is no exception. A lot of those cars are running 7 if not 8-speed gearboxes nowadays, but this is a 6-speed box. However, it is still that paddle shifted unit. It is hydraulically actuated, and the gears are all lined up in a row, and you have got a selector fork that runs through a selector barrel that just rotates to move the cogs around. The drivers will undoubtedly already be familiar with this either from road cars or from sim racing, but pretty much every top level racing car is running a sequential gearbox of some flavor nowadays, so this one is no different. Probably the most techie part of this car, and for many drivers getting into Formula 4 disciplines is probably the first time that they've driven a car that has a proper sequential box. Either they've been driving karts, which are effectively direct drive with a centrifugal clutch, or they've been driving cars with a manual transmission. This time, though, this is a proper sequential, up and down through the box sequentially, and you've got a clutch as well. This one has a clutch on the steering wheel. I don't know if there are any variants of this car in terms of where they might be running different regional championships that might still utilize a foot clutch, but this one here has a clutch paddle on the back of the steering wheel, just like you would expect to see nowadays on a Formula 1 car. Real cool. Weight, as we mentioned, 570-ish kilograms, so that's cool. And brakes. What else do we have here in terms of techie things? The brakes are actually the most pedestrian part of this car. They're 4-piston calipers all around, running on steel or aluminum discs. That's it. No carbon brakes, no carbon ceramic brakes as you would see on Formula 2 or Formula 1 or LMP1, Hypercar, GTP. None of that. It's still steel or aluminum brakes, which of course are going to be a little bit tricky as they start to heat up and wear in, so that's still something that drivers might be more familiar with if they've been driving road cars or if they've been driving karts. But again, cost savings and homologation and safety. The carbon brakes, they can catch fire if you just stop after you've been running on track. The aluminum or steel ones, not so much. So again, different things for different venues, and this car is trying to cater to a wide variety of venues, a wide variety of entrants, privateers, larger teams with larger support systems behind them. Whatever you have, this car is able to accommodate it to a reasonable degree of cost effectiveness while maintaining a competitive balance as well as safety for all competitors. So that's really cool. Race Sim Studio, though, why would they bring us a car like this? Well, first of all, it's the successor to RSS 4, which was the older version of the Miguel Formula 4 car. So this is its successor, and we really bring it into the modern era here today in 2024. The most obvious indicator that this car is a more modern one than its predecessor is the presence of Halo. Halo is something that we are seeing pretty much universally now on all FIA-sanctioned open-wheeled series. You know my thoughts on Halo from previous videos that I've made. I hate the thing, but it is here. It is in all forms of FIA-sanctioned open-wheel motorsport nowadays, so it's here in Formula 4 as well, and, well, we've got to deal with it. But for the drivers coming in from karts, this is the first time that they've been sitting in their racing vehicle versus on top of it. So they're going to have to get used to that. They're going to have to get used to the Formula 1 spec cockpit surround that this car also has. And therefore, because ultimately if their career aspiration is to reach Formula 1, they're going to deal with Halo there. So, well, here's Halo in Formula 4. So we get everybody used to it so that we control the population in terms of their expectations and their preferences. Social eugenics aside, what is this car? What do we actually see before us? Well, if we stop our rotation and we start to move in closer to the front end of this car, we see a very simplistic front nose and front wing assembly. It is a single main plane wing with a gurney flap. We have got that main plane here in carbon with two end fences. This would not have looked out of place on a Formula 1 car about 20 years ago, but nowadays things have really moved on in terms of CFD and 3D printing and just CAD in terms of designing all of these things, that this geometry is overly simplistic when we try to think about anything beyond this level. But here in Formula 4, a gurney flap over a flat main plane really does work, and then we've got these rather simplistic two-dimensional almost end fences. They do their job, and that's about it. The underside of the wing is the airfoil shape to try and accelerate air under the car. The end fences just try to keep air from spilling out too much, but that's it. The nose cone, the nose tip on this car, is wide and flat. It is a crash structure as well. That front wing attached to that nose cone with these two stubby little vertical pylons, and that's about it. Makes sense. Top side of the car, we have got our nose cone, we have got the front nose structure, and it comes to the monocoque here with this shut line. We've got these little fairings over top of the struts. These are the third springs, the heave springs, and they're also going to be your principal shock absorbers for the front suspension. That makes sense. Front suspension geometry, double wishbone push rod, as you can see. Got the wishbone here, the lower one carrying the brake lines into the wheel hub. That looks really nice, and these perforations in that disc there in the wheel hub, that's your wheel speed sensor. I like that very much. Brake line going into the caliper, your 4-pot caliper. That looks really nice. And then your bushings here, your uprights for the suspension pickup points. There you go for the upper wishbone. Real cool. There's your connection into the monocoque. Fore and aft. Looks good. And then your push rod, which is transmitting basically all of the shock loading into the dampers on top of the chassis. Looks cool. And of course that's reiterated here on the right side of the car. Same hardware, brake line, wheel speed sensor, and then your suspension pickup points, bushings, and all that. Looks good. I could take this car apart myself. I have no doubt about that whatsoever. Real cool. Outboard side of the wheel, there is your wheel nut, center locking nut with its retainer clip. That's cool. There's your caliper, brake disc, steel or aluminum, brake pad. Do we have a pad in here? Did RSS bother to model a brake pad? Yep, that's a pad. That is a pad, ladies and gentlemen. I like that. I recently did brakes on my daily driver, so yep. Well familiar with the sights, sounds, and smells of the brake system. I like that. Real cool. Regardless, top of the monocoque, there is your center stay of halo and the cockpit area. Wing mirrors here on either side of the cockpit monocoque. Cool. Simple stock to support that wing, or that mirror rather. A wing mirror, really. No real aerodynamic purpose here for the mirrors. Just cool, like that. Cockpit sill, integrating the side of the monocoque, which integrates the cockpit surround, the crushable foam inside the cockpit. We'll look at that a little bit later on. Here's the side pod, flat and simple, with the inlet for the radiator through here. Looks cool. Inside the radiator. And there's the tunnel that would carry the radiator, and then we would start to funnel air through the car that way. Speaking of funneling air through the car, here we go. Here's a tongue and tea tray. Looks like a Formula 1 car, doesn't it? Yeah, just a little bit. It is a baby Formula car, and therefore we're trying to get drivers accustomed to seeing things like this and starting to pay attention to, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't ride this curb so heavily because I can damage this thing, and that's going to affect my performance. Just as we would have on a modern Formula car, we don't have a keel. The lower suspension elements, they mount directly into the monocoque rather than to a keel down here, which would be a little bulbous protrusion out the bottom of the monocoque. And you see the bottom of the cockpit area bifurcating that flow, right and left. Looks cool. Top edge of the floor with a little flap here to keep the air entrained to the top of the floor through the diffuser section. Underneath the floor, we have a center plank, just like on a Formula 1 car, and then a slightly raised section. This is what we would call the reference plane on a Formula 1 car. No tunnels here, but it de facto acts as a pseudo-tunnel to funnel air through what there is of the diffuser. Not much of a diffuser, but there is a diffuser here. It's not particularly raked in terms of trying to encourage air to expand to create a lot of under tray downforce, but it's going to create a little bit, and you see it here. Looks cool. Coming to the rear of the car, here is our rear suspension, another double wishbone push rod arrangement just like we had on the front end. There we go. The only difference here is our differential out the back of the transaxle, drive shaft out the back to the rear axle. Otherwise there's our brake line. We don't have a wheel speed sensor on the rear wheels, doesn't matter, because we've got our double wishbone push rod suspension. The dampers here on top of the gearbox, there are the dampers, cool. Look to be mounted vertically, that's cool. And then beyond that, to the back of the gearbox is our rear crash structure. This is straight out of Formula 1. This is basically a Formula 1 spec component just bolted onto the back of an F4 car. Rear crash structure, it does what you would expect. Integrating a rain light. There are also strobe lights here in the rear wing, just like you would have on an F2 or F1 car nowadays. Real cool. Rear wing, obviously a spec component. Adjustable to your heart's content. We've got a small beam wing. This is where the support stocks are. supporting the rear wing, which is also transmitting its load into the gearbox. So the gearbox is a stressed member. The engine is a stressed member in this car as well, similarly to a Formula One car. Very cool. We also have an air intake snorkel right here. So this will be intaking air into the engine, which would be in here. Very cool. Nice. Very, very nice. It's a little bit more simplified than you would see on an F2 or F1 car, but all of the ingredients are here. We've got a front wing, a rear wing, we've got an under tray, engine in the middle, we've got front and rear suspension, which is some form of push rod, whether it's push rod or pull rod, but it's there. Spindly, makes sense. Everything is just purpose built for a particular function, and it's here. But it doesn't have a lot of the aerodynamic details that you would see on, say, a Formula One car, which really controls the performance and it controls the cost, which means that this becomes much more accessible for more or less the commoner to get into. You, right now, no matter who you are, could jump into this car and drive it reasonably quickly and feel like you're having a good time. If you really wanted to get it to hunker down and get the maximum performance out of it, probably would struggle unless you've had experience in a car like this before. But you could drive it competently. The same could not be said of, say, a Formula One car. You might be able to operate it, you might be able to get it around a lap, but are you going to be anywhere near the actual performance potential? No. Not unless you're already a world-class athlete and you've trained with either high loading or high G-force conditions. No, not possible. But a car like this, yeah, you get a reasonable idea of what it could do just as a civilian off the street. And that's what this car is designed for. It's designed to get up-and-coming talent up to speed with the world of open-wheel racing, and this is the package that they've chosen through which to pursue that goal. And I think it's a very cogent and competent one. Real nice. Regardless, what else do we see in this car? Particularly the cockpit. How are we going to be interfacing with this thing? Well, let's go inside. We go into the cockpit, and this is more or less the view that we'll see when we're driving. We see the steering wheel first of all. Steering wheel, it is very much like a Formula One car in that it does not have a continuous rim. You just got two cutouts for your hands, and that's about it. We will have a display which has multiple pages to show us different things in terms of our timing, as well as the car in terms of fuel level, revs, delta, in terms of our fastest lap relative to our current lap, gear position indicator, things like that. And we will see all of that when we drive the car. But beyond that, it's a steering wheel. It turns the car right and left, gear shift on the back, up on the right, down on the left, and we've got clutch paddles as well. Beyond that, inside the cockpit, there's our crushable foam structure. This is what the driver's head will run into in a lateral impact. And we've got a seat, carbon seat, carbon surround on the cockpit. That's cool. If we go into free cam, we can get a little bit closer to some of these details. There's that steering wheel, immaculately detailed as always from Race Sim Studio. No distortion or pixelation in these things. Look at how close we are. Yeah. That is sharp. I like that. RSS, Formula 4. The F with the negative space in there. I like that. Cool. Cockpit surround. There are the clips to remove that cockpit surround, that collar. Very nice. Side of the cockpit, there's an electronics box, unlabeled. Some more foam around where the driver's shoulders would be. Through here. No chassis plate on this one. Race Sim Studio tend to include a chassis plate. They've not with this particular car. Here we go. Starter, rain light, ignition. Cool. Car does have an internal starter. Being a 4-pod engine, not particularly exotic. Master switch. Cool. Inside here, there are your pedals, throttle, and brake. That's it. So left foot braking all the time with this thing, just like a kart. Very, very nice. You do have a foot rest as well, I believe. Cool. Paddles here on the back for your clutch. Paddles here for your gear shift. Quick release collar. Remove the steering wheel. Steering column. Goes all the way through the monocoque. Electronic connection for the steering wheel instrumentation. Seatbelt detail, I like the weave detail here. Center buckle. RSS Formula 4. That detail on the seatbelts as well. Nice. Really, really nice. I like what we're seeing here. Anything that they've forgotten? Not really. Kill switch here for the marshals. Roll bar, integrating the snorkel. Camera. There's no camera mount per se, but there is a camera here, this lipstick camera on top of the car. They've bothered to model the lens as well as a little iris inside the lens. That's cool. Wire connecting the camera to the car's ECU. Cool. Inside the engine cover, not much to see in there really. Real nice. The other thing that I'll point out, this aperture right here, this is the engine exhaust. The exhaust does not come out the back, it comes out the right side of this car. Why does it do that? I don't know. It on the previous Formula 4 car, it came out the right side, but it exhausted right about here, just after the rear suspension. Here they've just taken the engine exhaust and they've dumped it right here. So shortest distance, I guess, from when it exhausts from the cylinders. It goes from a 4-into-1 collector pipe and then it just gets belched out the side of the car. Perhaps there's a little bit of a benefit in terms of merging with the airflow toward the beam wing, but yeah, that's where it is. So when we're driving the car, if you happen to get a view into the right side wing mirror, you'll see some flames coming from there from time to time as we are coming on and off the throttle, as the engine is just hitting some extra afterburn on overrun. But yeah, that's what we have here on Formula RSS 4, and it's a really cool thing. Again, not the flashiest car that you'll ever see, certainly not the fastest as far as open-wheelers go, but this is a really fun car, and I endeavored to show you why that is and why it's a valuable experience for any sort of sim racer, whether you're experienced or you're just coming into Assetto Corsa. This is a very important car, I think, and you'll be very well served to get it, and I endeavored to show you why next. Welcome to Vallelunga. Before we get out on track, though, let's take a look at the setup screen and see what's going on here with Formula RSS 4 2024. Run-of-the-mill setup screen for the most part here in Assetto Corsa. The first thing that presents us is the gear screen. We have two sets of drive ratios that we can choose, short and long. The long here is selected by default. The short stack tops out with the top speed of 230 kilometers per hour in 6th gear. The long set buys you 252. Vallelunga is one of those tracks where you could kind of go either way because it's got a long straight, but the rest of the circuit is rather compact. So we will see how that develops, but we're going to start with the long set here just because of that straight. Tire screen here. First of all, we have our tire compound. These slick, soft tires are fitted by default. You can also select a wet compound, but that's all you've got. You got the wets or the slicks. Tire pressures default to 17 psi all around. The range of adjustment here goes from 16 psi all the way up to 23 psi. I believe that is the same on all four quarters, and indeed it is. Cool. Fuel, we have got the fuel zeroed out to keep the engine quiet. However, maximum fuel capacity on this car is 45 liters. We'll just quiet that down once again for the time being. Aerodynamics, not much to speak of here, but we do have front and rear wing adjustments, including a gurney flap on the front wing, as we talked about in showroom. Defaults to 5 degrees on the front wing, 2 on the rear with the gurney flap fitted on the front wing. We can decrease our front wing down to 3 degrees, which is the minimum range of adjustment, all the way up to 7 degrees, and it just changes in steps of 2. So 3, 5, 7, and that's what you got on the front end. The rear wing defaults to step 2. We can decrease it to step 1, step 0, or all the way up to step 4. The gurney flap on the front wing, that's just on or off. And if we go to our free cam here for a moment, just take a look at that trailing edge right here. The gurney flap on that front wing does not appear to change anything visually. However, it is doing that effect duly in the sim. Cool, just making sure I'm not missing anything else visually here. Nope, no change. However, the angle of attack does change visually on the front and rear wings, I do believe.
Does not change on the front wing. It does change, however, on the rear wing, quite evidently. There we go. So there's maximum and there's minimum. Cool. That's what we've got there. The brakes, we have got brake bias, defaults to 54% to the front axle, brake power there at 100% by default. You can go all the way up to 115% on brake power if you want, or down to 70%. That's just basically to your taste. Force feedback, FFB linearity here, the only adjustment here. That's also adjustable to your taste. Beyond that, suspension screen number 1, alignments, camber and toe on all 4 corners. Default values are shown. Suspension 2, the main settings, wheel rates, ride heights, travel ranges here for our front and rear suspension, all 4 corners. Cool. Suspension 3, roll. The anti-roll bars front and rear. Defaults there. Very stiff on the rear and relatively soft on the front, but of course you can adjust this to your heart's content. Dampers, fast and slow. Actually just bound and rebound. No fast or slow here. But I believe this is more so to do with your more conventional dampers. It's not the heave spring. I think the heave spring is going to be more set here via ride height and the travel range here on screen number 2, but I could be wrong on that. Visuals, the only visual setting here is halo. The central stay of halo, we can make it transparent. You'll still see the outline of it, but you can see through it, so you can see there. But we're going to keep that to step 0, which is the default setting, which means we can see the whole thing. Pit stop strategy is default. Stack Assetto Corsa, as you might expect. I want also to see here before we get in the cockpit, these flashers here, obviously the pit lane speed limiter or rain light, these are very crisp and very nicely done. I really like that. And when you start to look at them at an angle, particularly as you start to zoom in, yeah, there you go, you can start to see lens flare. That is very nicely done. I really like that effect. Sorry if flashing lights tend to bug you, but that looks really, really nice. And again, that's just attention to detail that you will get from RaceSim Studio. That is a feature that, quite honestly, you're not looking for. But then when you see it, you say, you know what, that looks really nice. So hats off for the rain light effect on this one. I haven't noticed if that's on any of their other cars as of late, but now I'm going to start looking for that because it looks really good. Be that as it may, though, we've got ourselves in the cockpit. We will hide our HUD for the moment. There we go. And we can see what's going on here. Steering wheel. Obviously, the engine is off with no fuel on board, but what the steering wheel shows us is the following. We've got ourselves everything alive. Obviously, lap time in the lower left ticking away just past 6 minutes, 10 seconds. We have got delta to our best lap above that, and then turbocharger boost pressure is at the top of the left-hand column. Engine RPM represented numerically there in the upper center, obviously zeroed out right now, as is the fuel level, which is to the top right. Below that, we have got our speed in kilometers per hour, and the best lap time will be shown once we actually set one. In the center there, the hash mark, the tach there is neutral. So that's our gear position indicator. The tach is showing neutral. However, if we change our page on the steering wheel, here we go. We've got ourselves page 2. What do we see on page 2? From the top right, we have got our position on track, so we are 1 of 1, so there we go. Fuel consumption in kilometers per liter, and then race laps, we are on lap 0, obviously, at the moment. Brake bias here shown numerically at 54%, now 54.5. Now back to 54, that's cool. And then tire temperatures in degrees C, they're at ambient. The lights that you see flashing across the top right now are our pit lane speed limiter indication. And in the middle of all that, we will have shift lights coming up sequentially from left to right. One more page here. This is page 3. I'm going to be cycling between this page as well as this page, which is our default for the time being, for the most part, when we're out on track. But we have got a tachometer in the upper section on the left side, and then we have got ourselves engine RPM represented numerically on the right side of that. Below that, tire temperature quite obviously in degrees C, brake bias below that. We've got our clock current lap time across the bottom. Our delta above that, it will change colors, green or red, relative to being ahead or behind the last lap delta in terms of the best lap. And then we have got our lap counter, and then I believe our fuel economy again in the middle of the right-hand column there above the RaceSim Studio logo. Pit limiter active. You can see when we turn that on via our extended controls. The extended controls are also what's enabling us to change pages here. When I manually activate the pit lane speed limiter independently of us being in the pit lane and the game doing it by default, you see pit limiter comes up there below the zeros right now. Turn it off and it goes away. The default page, we turn on the pit limiter again, nothing else happens, so that's just on that page, that white backdrop page for that particular little option. So that's kind of cool. However, going back to the pits, we'll get some fuel on board. 20 liters here. And we will just start to get ourselves accustomed to what this thing is doing. I want pedals up. Put pedals in the lower left. And then just generally having a look around in the cockpit. We saw all this in showroom view, but obviously we're in the car now with our seatbelts securely fastened. And everything else is as you would expect. Yep, RSS, they never stop at even the smallest detail. There we go, we've got a homologation sticker there on the bottom of Halo. Ridiculous. But it's there. Of course it is. Regardless, we got the engine fired up, we are strapped in, and we have got a little bit to ourselves for as long as our hearts desire. So, clutch in. First gear, there is first gear. Now you can see that we have got gear position indicated. And we'll raise our revs a bit. And we'll slowly let our clutch out. It starts to bite right away. But it's a little bit grabby. But we get going. And we can hear those sounds. We hear the turbocharger spooling up. Hear some wonderful driveline noises as well. Very cool. You can see some licks of flame there behind me in the right-hand mirror. That is, again, the exhaust for the engine is right there out the side of the car. I don't know why they put it there, but that is where they put it. You will see copious amounts of flame on overrun from this little 1.3 liter 4-pot engine. Kind of funny, but also kind of cool. Go. Not quite full revs there, but just bringing it in. Don't really have to worry about brake temperature so much on this car because they're aluminum or steel discs. Tire temperature, though, is a thing. Here's full revs. Red line's at about 6250. Where it's giving you the whole 180-ish horsepower. Again, it doesn't sound like much, but the car weighs 590 kilos thereabout. Very, very nice. Look at that, 615 seconds down on our section best. It's a world record. Obviously, that is not representative. All right. Well, the engine is immediately happy. The brakes are pretty much immediately happy. And being a rather hot morning here, the tires are more or less happy already. So what have we here? Well, we have got ourselves, ladies and gentlemen, a baby Formula car. It's an open wheeler. I can see the top of the front wheels there. I've got a fancy steering wheel with lights, and I got paddles on the back of it. I've got wings. I've got spindly little suspension. I've got an under tray that does something. Doesn't do all that much, but it does something. Nearest makes no difference. It's a Formula One car, right? Well, I mean, not exactly. However, what is it conveying to me? How is it beginning to communicate as we start to hunker down and show it some reasonable performance here? Well, as you would expect, everything is very responsive. You get on the throttle, and even though this engine is turbocharged, and even though it's only got 1.3 liters behind it, it's very, very peaky. You get on the throttle, and the power is there. We just spun up the rear axle a little bit right there. There is basically no turbo lag whatsoever. I don't think this engine has any sort of anti-lag on it, but if it doesn't, it really doesn't need it. You get on the power, and it's all there. It's, I guess you could call it peaky in the sense of it's touchy, but if you don't want the performance, don't get into the throttle, as it should be. It almost drives like a naturally aspirated engine. If I didn't hear the whoosh as the boost pressure builds, and if I didn't hear the chirp from the wastegate as we got out of the throttle, I wouldn't suspect this engine to be turbocharged, really. Gearbox is obviously just point and click. Up and down, no problems. Auto lift and auto blip. You don't have to think about it. Down those two gears right there. No thoughts. No locking on the rear on the downshifts. The rev matching is quick and it's accurate, and it is more than sufficient. The brakes are good enough. They're not insane in the sense of you don't just brush them and then it feels like you've run into a wall. Not like when you get, say, F1 brakes up to temperature and you just brush the pedal and you've lost 100 kilometers an hour in half a second. Not quite like that. They are a bit more progressive. You can modulate them a bit more easily, and you can use them to their fuller extent a little bit more easily than you can with brakes that are a little bit higher spec than this, particularly the carbon-carbon brakes, because they are very grabby. But these, they're steel discs, so they're going to do what steel discs do. They're going to grab, they're going to be consistent over a very wide temperature range. However, the hotter they get, the less effective they become. So in circuits like this where you do actually have a lot of braking, particularly in the sectors 2 and 3, you might get a little bit of brake fade over time, particularly on a hotter day like today, but we'll see how that develops over the course of our runs here. Tires feel really good. They're slicks. They've got a lot of grip. They have a lot of margin with which you can apply that grip. However, as you saw on the last lap, you can overstep them on traction a little bit, particularly in the lower gears. The higher gears, really, you don't have enough torque to worry about that so much, but in the lower gears, particularly if the tires are colder, that might be a concern. How does the balance feel? Well, initially, the car has a little bit of a tendency to want to step out under heavy braking, particularly if you don't have the steering perfectly straight as you get into the braking zone. And there's that traction. You can brake traction in second gear. I like that. However, once you get your braking done and you turn into the corner, particularly the low speed stuff like this, you have plenty of grip on the front. If anything, it's rear limited at lower speeds, as you would expect from a rear-wheel drive car. So you get on the power, you see you can slide it. I like that. Medium speed stuff like this little chicane. That's where your tire limited. The aerodynamics, what little aerodynamic grip there is, really isn't working yet at that speed. But it's through the higher speed stuff, like coming up here into turn 1, and then the exit through turn 2 or turn 3, whatever it is. This is where the car shows a bit of an understeer bias. There we got the camber to help us, and here this is a kink basically. Here through turn 3 though, it's a high speed entry, it's a lower speed toward apex, but it's almost a double apex this corner. Get through here, there's the understeer a little bit. Then it stamps itself out, and it hooks up nicely for the exit launch. Not too bad. Low speed stuff, plenty of grip. Wide on entry here, so we can clip in for the exit. That worked nice. Similar thing here, missed the apex a little bit. Still take a little bit of an exit launch from that. The quick left-right. You can use a little bit of trail brake and a little bit of throttle modulation to help the front end tuck in. Something you can do to a little bit more minimal extent in higher powered, higher downforce cars, because that tends to upset them a little bit more than it does this one. But here, the suspension is soft enough. The tires are a little bit overpowered enough relative to the rest of the aerodynamic performance envelope, to the extent that it exists, that you can make those adjustments with your pedal inputs a little bit more grossly than you can in some of the faster Formula cars. That's appropriate for something that is meant to be a learner's car, so to speak. Saw that it tried to break free a little bit under braking, turned into understeer through mid-corner, but it was stable enough. Car is really not trying to get one over on you, but you do have to be a little mindful on the brake pedal. Just watch out for the steering, because it will want to break free a little bit. I think there's a little bit of crossweight in the car, actually. Not entirely sure where, and it's not really something you can adjust. I suppose you could adjust it with suspension if you wanted, but it feels like that when you brake hard, the weight transfer goes forward and a little bit to the left. It almost feels like a little bit of crossweight. So just keep that in mind. Here, throw it in, get on the power, just keep it in. Nice. A little bit of trail braking to the apex, hard on the throttle, and to back out ever so slightly there. First gear through here. And a little little bit more of a launch as you would expect. Very nice. Bit of understeer mid-corner. Correct for it. Enjoy the exit launch. Very nice. What are we doing here on fuel? Yep, 10.9. Cool. 136.434. That last lap, that was our best of the session thus far. There's that weight transfer a little bit. You can see you can save it. Gonna lose some time doing so, but you can save it. .8 kilometers per liter in our fuel economy. That's cool. There's some more of that understeer in that transition zone between braking and cornering. Therefore, it stands to reason that at least not on this default setup, this is not really a car that likes braking and turning at the same time. It's not to say that many cars particularly like that. Of course, you can always try to tweak a setup to be more or less accommodating to that if your style fundamentally relies on that. But I would say out of the box, this car doesn't really like that so much. Probably best to be avoided until you really start to get a handle on it. Here, just throttle modulation, no trail braking, and there is a bit more understeer. But with the trail braking, the rear end does want to come around, but you can use that slide to shift the momentum from the rear toward the front, to squat those front tires into the deck and get a little bit more purchase and help you get the nose in through the corner. Of course, doing that too much is going to wear the tires, but win some, lose some, everything is a compromise. Go. Get to the apex now. Right. Nice launch out of there. A little bit of squirreliness under power. Again, it's just the slightest bit of power oversteer. It snaps itself out without you needing to do much, but just be mindful that it can happen. Bit of trail brake, there's the apex, cut back in, trail brake again, there's the second apex, let it go wide, a little bit of oversteer. Very nice. The best lap of the session there. 136.222, I like it. And as quickly as you can gain boatloads of time, you can give it away. And to hesitate just a little bit on the throttle into turn one, and it costs it 0.2. Because this car doesn't have crazy amounts of horsepower, you can't drive yourself out of a deficit on a given lap. You have to conserve momentum. And you'll find that the more time you spend trying to overdrive the car, just trying to force yourself to find pace, the slower you become. Because every steering input that you make, every little brush on the brakes, particularly if you're trying to use trail braking, or every time that you need to correct for that snap oversteer under braking, you're losing that momentum, and the car can't gather it back up very quickly because you've only got 160 to 180 horsepower. And then when you overstep it really badly, you can risk spinning the thing like that. So, you know, it's a formula car. It really is. And it's honestly despite having about the same amount of power as my daily driver, although an awful lot less weight than my daily driver, I've got to say that this is an incredibly engaging driving experience. There's that oversteer again. It seems to be something that's happening more consistently now. I guess as the tires have worn in and really started to heat up. 101C on the right, on the left rear, 92 on the right. And of course the tires just get hotter and hotter the more they slip. And of course there's the right front just chilling out at 79. One more flyer and head back into the pits. See what we can do with this one. This is obviously the only place where I'd be able to tell, but it almost feels like maybe this long gear stack is a little too long, but then again, we're hitting what's going to be top speed for the shorter stack there, so I don't know. Really hard to say for this car, and this track, and this day, and these conditions. You can see here now that I've knocked a lot of the new out of the tires by this point and don't have the ultimate grip anymore. But what we do have is stable enough. Obviously, I'm getting a little bit greedy through some of these corners. I'm trying to find time that's just not there anymore. But it's not getting ridiculously out of shape. It's still very well controllable. No issues there. That understeer, and we've given up a lot of time, but we are going to box this lap anyway. The tire temperatures have dropped off a little bit. That's just fun. That is just an awful lot of fun. Drop it into reverse there to kill the engine. Let's see here. Really not a whole lot in terms of updated textures for tire wear. Not really seeing anything like that. Not seeing any dirt textures or anything. Didn't really go off the road, but nonetheless, very nice. That wonderful detail that we can see here. Look at that. The detail does not really diminish, even when you get really close in like this. Not only do you see that wonderful wheel hub detail, the wheel nut with the retainer, I guess you'd call that a cotter pin, but you've got the brake disc, the caliper. Very, very nice, I've got to say. There's a little strut inside that we didn't see in showroom view. Both sides. Very cool. That model that we saw in showroom view is the same model that you see out here on track, and it looks marvelous, I've got to say. I should say that this model in particular, it is comprised of 216 objects, which are made of 458,138 triangles over 57 different materials that are shown in here. So, yeah, this is a very highly detailed model, high polygon count, very high resolution, as we have come to expect day in and day out from RaceSim Studio, no matter what it is that they're bringing to us. And whether it is the latest and greatest Formula Hybrid release or it's a car like this that maybe is not going to be so much of a headline grabber, but whatever, RaceSim Studio always apply themselves to the problem, and they deliver. They really, really do. I mean, this thing looks absolutely immaculate just standing still, and it drives very nicely, as you have seen, I hope. It's really a great little car. What I want to do is just get it back into the garage a little bit and get ourselves trimmed out. See what we can do in terms of maybe a quali run. Let's take out all the wing. Just take out all the wing. We are not going to touch the gearing. And low fuel. And new tires, of course. And that's all we're doing. Because there's really not much else you can do to this thing because, well, it's meant to be a teaching aid. All right. Gotta remember on this lap to bring the tires in. Otherwise, everything else is ready to go. Feeling a bit of understeer there because the tires are a little bit cold. Good working range in terms of temperatures for these tires is, I think, anywhere between 80 and 90 C. So we are a bit off of that at the moment. Not using the tire warmers, although you can if you would like. Definitely feeling the effects of having colder tires right now. I was hoping they heat up by osmosis for the most part. Definitely feeling a bit of understeer. Also, we took out that wing, so feeling that a little bit more perhaps due to that. Let's see if we can do anything relative to our session best. Which, to remind you, 136.222. Definitely going faster down the straight anyway. Losing time in the corner, though. Again, the tire is still not 100% ready. But gaining it back down the straight. Really lost it there. But recovered! You can recover it! It's wild! Gaining the time back, too. How about that? This twisty section is going to be what is the tattletale here. Is it quicker to take the wing out, or is it better to leave it on? Seems like it's probably better to leave it on so far. Gonna say it's definitely better to leave it on. Yeah, gonna agree with myself there. So the arrow does do something. Doesn't do all that much in terms of things that you can feel, but it does do something in the corners. But down the straight, I mean, it's no contest. I'm gaining whole tenths of seconds. Oh, you couldn't feel that, but I certainly could. That was quite intense in that braking zone. No, we are not staying above the delta. Got a better exit there that time, but again, the twisty stuff is where it falls apart. Yep, falling apart. Yeah, no way. No way. Closer than last time, but still not going faster. It wants to oversteer, it wants to understeer, then it wants to oversteer again. It doesn't know what it wants to do, but either way, you can correct it. Huh. And that was just colossal amounts of understeer. Basically just trying to get it into a drift now. Yeah, let's give up on that before we get a little bit too carried away. So, no, taking the wing out does not just grant you more pace by default. Obviously, it makes you quicker down the straights, but you pay for it in the corners, as you would expect, because, well, some things don't change. Doesn't matter how powerful your car is. If it's got wings on it, odds are there's a reason for it. So, no, although we can get within a tenth or so of our best time properly trimmed out for this track, or at very least trimmed out a little bit better for this track, yeah, it's not quicker just to take the wings out. So, no, Don't try that. It's not going to work. Maybe it'll work at a place like Monza, but not here where you actually have to turn at reasonable speed. So just keep that in mind for when you're working on setups with this thing. But working on setups with this thing is exactly what it's for, because there are plenty of things that this car does that will translate into the higher end cars, such as Formula RSS 2 and, of course, Formula Hybrid. So, yeah, if you are newer either to Race Sim Studios lineup or if you're newer to open wheelers in Assetto Corsa in general, this could be a very valuable car for you because it is a baby formula car. It is something that's designed for you to learn with, and it's designed to teach you how do you drive a car like this, because they're a bit different from tin tops. You don't have a lot of weight, which means you have a whole lot less inertia in all axes, which means that your inputs have to be a bit different in that things happen a little bit more quickly in a car like this. So, if you are a little rusty with open wheelers, take a look at this thing. It is a really nicely done, stout, little, beautiful formula car. Formula RSS4 2024, that's what it is. It's wonderful, and I definitely quite highly recommend it. That's all I've got for you here today from Vallelunga, apart from some hot laps, which are to follow imminently. Until next time, though, do check out Formula RSS4 2024. Link in the description to the Race Sim Studio website where you can take a look at this car and then purchase it should you choose. Stay tuned for the hot laps, everyone. F-Man saying thank you very much for watching, and of course, we will see you soon.